Another exciting topic to talk about, and what we're going to be discussing actually is fats that worsen diabetes. You know, most of the time when people get a diagnosis of diabetes, they're told, well, you can't eat the carbs because the carbs turn to sugar. And so what do they have left to eat? We learned yesterday there's 3 things we can eat. There are carbs, there's proteins, and there's fats. Okay, so if you can't eat the carbs, then what do you have to eat more of? Protein and fat. But there are also fats that worsen diabetes. So we need to know which fats worsen diabetes so we can stay away from those fats and focus on the fats that are going to be good to eat. And also, I mentioned it once, and I'm going to say it again, and you're going to hear it again before this period is over. In order to reverse type 2 diabetes, you have to increase your carbohydrates. You have to increase the amount of carbohydrates that you eat. It doesn't seem to make sense, but I'll explain it to you as we go through this program, okay, at least to some extent. And then, so anyway, we're eating more of that. We're eating less of the bad fats. We can eat the good fats. We need to know what the bad fats and the good fats are so we can have the better outcomes. But remember, well, let's take our verse for today. The verse for today says, "And it shall be a perpetual statute for your generations, that throughout all your dwellings, that ye eat neither fat nor blood." Now that was recorded in Leviticus by Moses. God had given him this instruction. Why can we not eat fat? And so anyway, we're going to delve into that. And learning objectives for today. By the end of this program, you should be able to describe the relationship between obesity and diabetes pandemics. You should be able to identify which fats make diabetes worse and recognize which fats make better substitutions for the bad fats. And then also state the effect of high-fat consumption on insulin resistance and have a macronutrient, name a macronutrient, that the body prefers to burn instead of fat. Before we go any farther, though, let's ask God's blessing today as we delve into this topic. Heavenly Father, I thank you for each person again that has assembled here this morning. And I thank you, too, for the camp meeting experience, for the opportunity to come apart for a little while and listen to words of life, to listen to the scriptures being expounded, to hear experiences of others that have improved their spiritual walk and also improved their health. And Lord, I pray today that you will be with each person, that their minds will be like sponges to learn the things that they need to know in their own kitchen in order to have optimal health and in order to best communicate with you. So Lord, we commit ourselves to you today in Jesus' name. Amen.
So remember that this is for educational purposes only. Don't do anything we say until you have talked to your physician. All righty? We don't try to treat, we educate. So I want to tell you about a lady that came to our seminar, Inez. When she decided to do something about her diabetes, her beginning A1C was 12.2. Is there anybody here that does not understand what an A1C is? Okay, there's quite a few. Well, let me tell you. The blood cells get a coating on them, and it's sort of like, forgive the comparison, but it's sort of like a donut. When they bake those donuts, they fry those donuts, and then they put them on the belt, and they run them under the glaze machine, it gets a coating of sugar on the outside of the donut. If they pick up that donut and take it back and put it on the belt again and run it through the glaze, what happens to the glaze? It builds up. There's a little bit more that gets on the outside of the donut. And they do that over and over, and it builds the glaze. Well, that's what happens with our blood cells. When we eat a meal, the blood sugar in this bloodstream increases, and the cells get a little tiny coating of that sugar on them. And that happens every time we eat. Then those blood cells die off. They live about 120 days. So there's a constant change in our body. So if we go to the physician, if I were to go to the physician tomorrow, I would make sure that I was really good tonight, and I would not eat any dessert. And so my fasting blood sugar in the morning hopefully would be normal, would be less than 100. But the physician says, well, your blood sugar is really good. How's it been running? Well, it's not been bad, doctor. And the doctor says, well, let me draw an A1C, because the A1C is going to give the history of that sugar coating on the blood cells. So in a little bit, he comes back in and he says, your A1C is 9. And it's like, well, I've been found out, because I had dessert the day before and the day before and the day before. And I hadn't been exercising and all these other good things. And so we want our A1C actually to be below 5.2. Eye damage begins at 5.2. You do not get a diagnosis of prediabetes until you have an A1C of 5.7. You get a diagnosis of diabetes at 6.5. So we encourage you, know your numbers, okay? 5.2 is where the eye damage begins. So Inez, actually, she had a sister that had been sick and she had been caring for her. And so the sister had diabetes, and she went to her physician, and she said, what do I need to do? When the doctor checked her and got her A1C of 12.2, something clicked with Inez, and she said, I'm going to change this. So she started working to lose weight. Before our seminar started, she had already lost 35 pounds. So she was well on her way. When she learned about burst exercise that we've been doing with you some, when she learned about that, she started doing it. She started walking after meals. She started increasing her fiber. Now, this little lady lived in Grundy County, and she was raising her grandchildren. So she was very busy. But what she would do is in the morning, she would do her laundry, and when she got it out of the dryer, she would take it and lay it on her bed. And she would do her work, and then after lunch, she would do her walking by picking up a garment, and she would walk down the hallway, and she would fold her garment, get it folded, turn back around, go lay it on the bed, pick up another one. Sometimes she had her laundry folded by the end of her 20 minutes. So she was very quiet, and we didn't know for sure what was going on with her. But by our 6-month follow-up, when she came back, she was off of all her blood pressure medicines, her diabetes medicines. She had a total 70-pound weight loss. And at that point, we still had the grant where we could check their A1Cs right there at our meeting. And Steve checked her A1C, and it was down to 5.8 from her 12.2. So we were thrilled at the difference it made for her, and she was so excited. So perhaps this can be your experience too. So reversing diabetes, type 2 diabetes is known as a lifestyle disease. It's sustained by a culture that promotes inactivity and unhealthy food choices, all leading to weight gain and obesity, the leading cause of type 2 diabetes. Indeed, 80% of the overweight will develop diabetes. And why will the other 20% not? If you don't have the gene, you will not get diabetes. And so that is why you can have obese friends that do not have the diabetes, because they just don't have the gene. But there are about 800 genes that impact diabetes, and so chances are really good that most of us have at least some of those genes.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how fats How fats affect diabetes? Well, one of the first things that happens is as a person starts going down the road to gaining weight and becoming diabetic, and remember this takes 13 and a half years on average before you get your diagnosis. They gradually begin gaining weight, and one of the things they do is they store fat in the muscle cells. Now, fat is not designed, the body is not designed to store fat in the muscle cells. The muscle cells are for activity, etc. But remember, Karen pointed out on the first day that inside every cell you have like a little cupboard. It's for emergency purposes. You know, if the furnace runs out, you got to have a little time here in order to get the glucose to the cell from the liver. You've got to have a little reserve time there, because the liver is where we store our extra sugars, right? Okay, it's going to take a few seconds for the signals to go to the liver and to come back. If the bear's chasing you and you're running hard, you're going to have some kind of extra energy reserve. Okay, and that's what's in the cell. But when that cupboard gets full, then what are you going to do with this extra fat? And actually what the body does is it just starts setting it around. Well, have you been in a pack rat's home? Okay? You go into pack rat's home and sometimes you have a little narrow path you can work through, but all this stuff is up here. Well, that's sort of what happens in the cell. It becomes like a pack rat's home. You can hardly get through. And the fat actually gets in the way of the signals being passed through. Insulin's supposed to come along, attaches to the outside of the cell, and it sends an enzymatic message. You know, I like to think of this as what happens when you step into the garage from your kitchen. There's usually a little button on the wall, and you push the button, an electrical signal runs from the button over to the motor that turns on and activates the door opener, which opens the garage door, and now you can bring stuff in. Well, it's very analogous to that kind of thing. When you need to get some glucose into the cell, what happens is insulin comes along, attaches itself to the outside and sends this signal through. And then it activates another opening, and now the glucose can go through. That's how it happens. And this thing, we represent it as a downward curved arrow. It's something called GLUT4 that makes that transfer happen. But when you get too much sugar in the cell, what's going to happen is it's going to short circuit that thing. When your cells are short circuited, they don't work right. And so in medical terminology, what we call this is happening is glucolipotoxicity. Gluco means sugar, lipo means fat. So you have too much sugar fat in the cell that's made the cell toxic, and now the cell develops insulin resistance, and it no longer can transport the signals through to get the sugar into the cell like it's supposed to happen. It's overloaded. It just has too much. So, in the liver, what happens in the liver? Well, first of all, when the muscle cells start filling up, then the glucose goes downstream. Glucose goes downstream and it's stored in the liver first. And then it's stored in the pancreas. And Dr. Roy Taylor talks about something he calls the twin cycle hypothesis. He says you have two things going on. You have too much fat over here in the liver, and you have too much fat in the pancreas. And when those two things come together, voila, you have the symptoms of diabetes. So, then in the liver, of course, when the liver starts taking on too much fat, it's going to cause increased insulin resistance, and it interferes with blood glucose regulation. We talked yesterday about how when your intestines and your stomach get empty, an enzyme is released, goes to the liver, tells the liver to release stored glucose, but the stored glucose makes the blood sugar rise, but because you're insulin resistant, you can't get it into the cells, so it becomes toxic. It becomes toxic to the body. In the pancreas, You have too much there. How much extra fat do you have to have in the pancreas in order for the pancreas to become toxic? Using the specialized magnetic resonance imaging studies over at Newcastle University, they determined that it can be just a 1/4 teaspoon of extra fat in the pancreas is adequate to tip you over and make you diabetic. And if you can't lose that, then you stay diabetic. But if you can lose that, the pancreas wakes back up and says, oh, we can go back to work. So that's really how fat affects diabetes. Now, when we've learned something special about the pancreas, though, and that is when you have a form of fat that's called saturated fat or trans fat. Those two fats, when they get in the liver, they actually will cause liver cells to go, pancreatic cells, they cause the beta cells in the pancreas to go into retirement. They stop working. They're still alive, but they're no longer contributing to society. They're sitting on the porch with their hands folded in the rocking chair. And they're doing nothing. But if you come along and provide the right environment, they'll wake back up and say, oh, we have a job to do. And they'll go back to work. So you have to have the capacity for those cells to wake back up in order to reverse your diabetes. So let's go to the next slide. By the time a person is diagnosed with diabetes, remember I said by the time you get your diagnosis, the average person has already been walking down the road and becoming diabetic for 13 and a half years. You've been developing insulin resistance. 80% of the U.S. population is insulin resistant. So can you live with 50% of the pancreas? Well, actually the answer to that is a resounding yes, but there's things that you have to do. You would have to control your fat intake. And that's not all. If a person eats a high-fat diet, it actually causes increased insulin resistance. And when you have increased insulin resistance, then you don't tolerate carbohydrates very well. Yes, back in the back. Would I define a high-fat diet? Actually, that's a very good question. If you're reading...
It's coming, Steve. It
is coming. It is coming, but she asked the question, so I'm going to briefly address it. And we'll talk more about it in a few minutes. 15% or less of your calories would put you in a low-fat category. Okay? The average American eats a 36% fat diet. That 36% of your fat calories come from fat. When you're looking at scientific studies, a lot of the scientific studies are made between a high-fat diet, 36%, or sometimes they'll do even higher than that, and they'll compare sometimes with what they call a low-fat diet, which is 25%. That's still a high-fat diet. If you're looking at those kind of studies are going to say, yeah, it's okay to eat lots of fat. Eat lots of fat. Our bodies need it, whatever else. But if there's more. There's more. We'll cover that in a few minutes.
Steve, there may be some folks here that miss the first lecture and don't understand what insulin resistance is. Just ask the group if there's someone that...
How many people here do not understand what insulin resistance is? Okay, we have a few hands. Okay, insulin resistance, let's put it in a nutshell. Our cells have a membrane all the way around that's very exclusive about what it lets in. It won't let anything in unless they have like a passcode or whatever to get in. So one of the things that happens in our body when we eat a meal, our blood sugar will rise. A high blood sugar is actually toxic to us. So you don't want to have a high blood sugar and keep it up high. You want to bring it down as quickly as possible. So we have this mechanism whereby we can bring that back down. So insulin plays a key role here. Your body secretes insulin. Insulin comes along and it attaches itself to the outside of the membrane. It's like saying, knock, knock. I've got a load of sugar for you. I need to put it in here. And when it attaches itself to the outside, a signal goes through and it opens the door and allows the glucose to come into the cell, or the sugar to come into the cell. But when a person becomes insulin resistant, see, the cell just takes on the sugar every time insulin comes out here. The cell takes on sugar. But when the reserves in the cell get built up to more than normal, the cell has plenty of sugar inside it. It doesn't need any more. But it can't communicate individually to what's going on out there. So it takes some of the extra sugar, makes it into a gum, and it stuffs it in the lock. Now when insulin comes along and puts the key in the door trying to open the door, there's gum in the lock, and it can't do it. Well, insulin doesn't care which cell it puts it in. So it just runs on down the street until it finds a lock that it can, a door that it can open, and puts it in there. What happens gradually over a period of time, these people become resistant to insulin. It's like a druggie. You start out with just, you start out with taking your first dose of drug and you get a high and it feels good, so you want to do it again and you will do it again. But each time you do it again, you don't get the same level of buzz. It's a little bit less, so it takes more and more. Well, the same thing happens in your body. You have to have more and more and more of the insulin in order to move the glucose out of the blood into the cell, because it's toxic. Remember, high levels are toxic. So that's insulin resistant. It's when the cells have all they can hold, they don't need any more, and so they've gummed up the doors. The locks on the doors are all gummed up, so they don't work well. And what we need to do to reverse diabetes, of course, is to make the cells hungry again. When you make the cells hungry again, then the cell says, whoa, wait a minute, we're not getting our share of sugars. We need more sugar in order to be able to operate. So it goes to the door and it pulls the gum out of the locks. The doors have been there all along, but now it pulls the gum out and the doors begin working again, and the cell gets the sugars that it needs. So sort of magical kind of thing. So back in 1927, J.S. Sweeney was doing a study with medical students, and he divided them into 7 groups. They fed them 7 different diets. And these diets ranged from high fat, sort of through a continuum, to high carbohydrate. And one of the things that they discovered was the higher the fat content of the diet, the more insulin resistance that people had. And these were young medical students. And when they would decrease the amount of fat in the diet, what do you think happened to insulin resistance? It dropped, and it drops rapidly, even in people with diabetes. So you can take somebody with diabetes, and you take them off the standard diet that they've been eating, which is high fat, high protein diet, and you put them on a diet that is high fiber, high carbohydrate, and within 3 days, they're going to start noticing their blood sugars going down, blood sugars going down, blood sugars going down. And over a few days, they're going to be reading numbers. So we have people that come to our classes and they start doing these things that we're talking about. And usually by the 3rd week, when people come in the 3rd week, the atmosphere in the room is absolutely electric. Why? Because blood pressures are coming down. They're seeing that. They're seeing numbers, fasting blood sugar numbers that they haven't seen in months. And they begin to realize this stuff is working. Now, lifestyle medicine isn't like a drug that you give intravenously. It takes a little while for it to work. And so we have to make the lifestyle change, and you stick with it, and then you start seeing the results. So, mutually exclusive fuels. This is something I think is really important for us to understand, because carbohydrates and fats in our body are like mutually exclusive fuels. If I'm eating a lot of fat, what happens is the fat is absorbed quickly through the intestinal wall into the lymphatic system. How many of you don't know what the lymphatic system is? Okay. You know what arteries and veins are, right? Arteries carry the blood to the tissues. Veins carry the blood from the tissues back to the heart. But you have tissue fluid in your body. You know when you swell up or you get a burn or something, it leaks this clear fluid? That tissue fluid has to go somewhere. And what it does, there's a whole system of vessels in your body, just like veins. But these are designed to carry the tissue fluids back to the heart. And the fat will be absorbed out of the food that you eat, and it's absorbed into the lymphatic system, and it's carried to the bloodstream. It enters the aorta, not the aorta, the superior vena. Anyway, it comes into the heart. Help me out. Where does it come into the heart at? You remember? Any of you nurses? Anyway, it comes into the vessels just before it goes through the heart. Been too many years. Okay. Well, anyway, it gets back into the blood circulation. When that happens, your body upregulates the enzymes that are necessary for digesting and metabolizing and storing the fat. So all those enzymes are upregulated. But when it does that, it downregulates the enzymes that are necessary for carbohydrate metabolism. The exact opposite can happen if you eat a diet that's low in fat and also high in fiber. The fiber slows the absorption of the fat, so it doesn't get in the lymphatic system so quickly. The body absorbs the carbohydrates first, and it says, whoa, we got a load of carbohydrates coming on. And so it upregulates all the enzymes that are necessary for carbohydrate metabolism, and it downregulates those that are necessary for fat metabolism. So it's like they're mutually exclusive fuels. If you're eating a high-fat diet, you're going to be carbohydrate intolerant. If you're eating a low-fat diet, you're going to be carbohydrate sensitive. Is that making any sense? Okay, so they're mutually exclusive fuels. And so fat inhibits glucose transport. I've just got to come out of this. I'm sorry. This is summertime, right? What am I doing wearing a coat? Okay, here we go. They took adolescents and they gave them infusions of fat intravenously. They put them in like hospital type controlled environment, and they gave them intravenous infusions. They measured their insulin resistance before the test, and then the following morning after the infusion was complete, they measured insulin resistance again. What do you think happened to insulin resistance overnight? Yes, it went up significantly. Then they gave the adolescents a medication that brought the fat in the blood back down. And what do you think happened to insulin resistance? Dropped. Question back here in the back. Yes, ma'am. What's the connection between glucose and cholesterol? Well, how deep do we want to get? Glucose, cholesterol is related to your fat. Glucose, if you have glucose coming into your system, you're going to burn most of the glucose. The glucose isn't going to become cholesterol. A very, very small percentage. Yesterday we covered that. 1/3 of 1% will become very low density lipoprotein, VLDL. But so if it's glucose that you're eating, no problem. Those of you that were here for yesterday afternoon's lecture about carbohydrates know that there's two primary sugars that we deal with at the end of digestion. One of those is glucose, and the other one is fructose. And fructose is the one that has a strong association with your cholesterol. So 30% of the fructose that you eat will become the VLDL, which is the cholesterol type fat. So we really need to watch the fructose intake. Did that answer your question? Okay. let's talk a little bit about the history of dietary fat. Prior to 1910, the main place that we got fats in our diet was from eating butter, which is the fat from the milk, the cows. Okay, tallow. What's tallow? That's beef fat. And we would have lard, which is pork fat. Okay? So those were the three sources of fat. But there was a product that was invented, and it was advertised a lot. It was called, and their advertising slogan, as they said, it's 99 and 44 100% pure. What? Ivory soap, yes, absolutely. It's ivory soap. And ivory soap became very popular. Prior to that time, most of the soap that you had was what Grandma cooked out in the backyard, over in the big cast iron kettle. You know, she put her lye in, and she would put her lard and whatever else, her old renderings from the kitchen, etc. And she would make this fat. She would make this soap from the fat, render it out. But here we have a new product that was developed by Procter & Gamble, and it became so popular because it smelled good, it washed, it cleaned, they could wash clothes with it, they could wash dishes with it, they could bathe with it, they could do all kinds of stuff with this product, and it was just wonderful. And so Procter & Gamble, located up around Cincinnati, they were scouring every slaughterhouse up and down the Mississippi River Valley trying to get fat renderings to make their soap with, and they just couldn't find enough fat to keep up with the demand. So finally they found the answer in the cotton milling industry. When those cotton seeds are crushed, they could they could get an oil from that, and they could make their soaps from that. But the problem with that was it was a liquid oil, and it went rancid very rapidly at room temperature. Well, that doesn't help a product very well. If a soap goes rancid and smells nasty and tastes stale and whatever else, you don't want to bathe in it. And so Procter & Gamble had a problem. They said, what are we going to do? Well, they heard about a new product that had just been patented in Europe. So they put a man on the boat and they sent him to Europe with instructions to purchase that process. And he did. They brought the technology back, and within 2 years, they built a plant and had it running at maximum capacity, turning liquid oils into a solid fat by a process known as hydrogenation. And now they had plenty of fat coming from the cotton milling industry because they could make it into a solid shortening, and then they could make their soap out of that. And as a solid fat, it wasn't going to turn rancid. So they started marketing this and marketed it very widely. In fact, they filled semi-truckloads full of 2.5-pound tubs of Crisco, and they gave it away to housewives, and the housewives wouldn't use it. They said, that stuff is not healthful. But then we got involved in a world war, and the ladies were trying to stretch the food budget every way they could, and the Crisco happened to be sitting on their pantry shelves. And so they took it off, and they made biscuits with it, and they made their cakes with it, and they made their pies with it. And none of the family complained, and they didn't seem to have any adverse effects from using it. So the ladies started buying it. It was cheaper than the regular fats. And so this advertising campaign went on for many years, up into the 1960s. And doctors were telling people, you need to stop eating butter, you need to stop eating lard, you need to start eating margarine. Anyone remember that kind of advice? Yes, there's hands all over the room. So very good. Anyway, but in the 1940s, we actually linked the usage of trans fats, which are these fats that have been made from liquid into solid, we linked them to cardiovascular disease. In the 1950s, they linked it to heart disease. Later on, they linked it to diabetes, to stroke, to immune system disorders, to inflammation, and all sorts of stuff. And finally, by the 1990s, the government began requiring that food manufacturers list how much trans fat was in the food because of the public outcry. But the public still wasn't satisfied. So finally, on January 1, 2018, they had passed a law that went into effect that date and said you can no longer use trans fats in the food supply unless the manufacturer applies for an exception. So we know it's deleterious to our health. We know it makes diabetes worse. It makes cardiovascular disease and cancers worse. And yet it's still in our food supply. And if you read on the label and it says partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening, or it says even fully hydrogenated vegetable shortening, you're eating a trans fat. It's the worst of all the fats. It's going to make diabetes worse. Fats that make diabetes worse. So where are you going to find these kind of foods in the food supply? Well, they're often in baked goods or in restaurant fried foods, in things like donuts, my heart, in cakes, in cookies, in pie crusts, in frozen pizzas. French fries, yes, that's a restaurant fried food. Yes, your French fries and your onion rings and all of those kind of things. That's where we still get the majority of the trans fats in our diet. So we got to watch these things. Read labels, guys. Be cautious when you go out to eat. Now, let's talk a little bit about how industrial oils are manufactured. Now, industrial oils does not mean the motor oil that you put in your truck or your car. Industrial oils are oils that are produced industrially, and so that would be things like soy oil and corn oil and safflower oil and that you see in all these bottles when you walk down that grocery store aisle. And those things, what they do, the way that we make them, we take the seed or the vegetable or whatever it is, say like soybeans, and you grind the soybeans up. Then you pour a petroleum distillate into the mash that you just made. It's called hexane. It's a lot like gasoline. You pour it in there, and it dissolves the fat. So after you agitate it a little bit, then you take and pour the hexane off, and the fat goes with it. Now, they evaporate the rest of the hexane off the mash. The cattle get to eat that. But what they have on the other hand is they have all this hexane. So they evaporate the hexane out of what they poured off, and what they end up with is a black, tarry substance that looks nasty, it tastes nasty, and it is. Then you have to refine that to make it edible. So they heat it up above the flash point of oil. They heat it up to about 1,200 degrees. And if they had exposed it to air, it would just burst into flame at that kind of temperature. But they heat it up to burn off all these impurities, and then they filter it and they bleach it, and what they come up with is this beautiful bottle of oil that we use in our kitchen. The process of heating it to those very high temperatures, though, changes the nature of the molecule, and it makes it very pro-inflammatory. Now, what do I mean when I say pro-inflammatory? Yeah, it causes inflammation. It sure does. It causes inflammation. And so, when we talk about oils and which oils are good oils, well, there's really an oil hierarchy that we can look at. And some of the oils may be healthier than others. But if I'm a person and I'm eating a high-fat diet, the high fat in the diet causes increased insulin resistance, and it inhibits the glucose transport like we've talked about. It decreases the effectiveness of insulin, so the insulin you do have is not doing its job of moving the sugars well because of the high fat on the diet. Well, there's also impacts on the cardiovascular system. These things go hand in hand. And when you have the inflammation that is caused, it's like it makes the insides of the arteries raw. And the body's first response to an arterial lesion is to smear cholesterol on it, to help smooth it out and make it, help it to heal. It's like a salve. Cholesterol is sort of like a salve on the inside of the arteries. But when a person is consuming oils like this, the inflammation from the oils and whatever else, it makes the arterial linings a lot like Velcro. Everything's going to stick to them. And you take somebody and you feed them greens 6 times a day, and it makes the arterial lining like Teflon. Really smooths it out. And so let me just tell you experience. I want to tell you experience about Clyde. Clyde had come to our program. He did not know he had diabetes, but on the first night, we had a little grant that was allowing us to test A1Cs. And so we tested his A1C, and he had diabetes. And he was upset. He did not know he had it. He did not want it. And so he decided he was going to do something about it. And he started doing it with gusto. You see, he had just been to the doctor, and the doctor had done a workup on him, and they had checked his carotid arteries because he had a little bruit, a little whoosh sound when the doctor listened with the stethoscope. So he took him in and did an ultrasound, and the ultrasound showed he had a 75% blockage on these arteries that lead to the brain. So that means he's high risk for a stroke. Not quite high risk enough for them to do surgery, but they say, we need to watch you, buddy, because you are going down a bad road. Well, he came to us and learned then that he had diabetes. And that just all kind of alarm bells went off in his head, and he said, I've got to do something about this. And so he took our program, and he happened to have the opportunity to go hear T. Colin Campbell speak, who is probably the world's leading scientist on nutrition and disease. And he went up to him, and he asked him about the program and asked him about what we're doing, and he said, no oil. No oil. And so he decided to take our program, and he was going to go no oil. So he added that to it. We allow very, very small amounts of oil, but just to keep something like from sticking to the pan or whatever. But anyway, he took it a step further. No oil. About a year or a year and a half later, we had another program, and when he came to that program, he brought a stack of medical records about this tall because he wanted to prove what he was saying. He'd been back to the doctor. They had evaluated him. He no longer had his diabetes. It was all gone. He'd had significant weight loss. And also, he had been back and they had done a repeat ultrasound. The carotid arteries were completely clear. Completely clear. Now, I don't know if you understand cardiovascular disease, but if you have a blockage in your artery here, you got a blockage in your artery here, you have a blockage in your artery here, you have a blockage in your artery here. I mean, it's just like all over the body. So in order to clean these out, what did he have to do with all those other arteries? Yeah, he had to clean them out too. Yes, ma'am.
Are you lumping like extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil in the same?
That's coming up.
That's she's reading her mind. She's a thinker. She's asking good questions. Am I lumping extra virgin olive oil or coconut oil or everything in the same? What I'm going to say right now, trans fats are the worst fat. In fact, that's on my next slide. Let's go to the next slide and just look at this. And I will answer your question. So this is the fats continuum. What we need to do is we need to be floating up here on the top. Most of what we need to be eating are what we call whole food fats. You need the fiber with your fat because it slows the absorption of the fat. It allows the carbohydrates to be absorbed first. But anyway, whole food fats would be things like avocados, olives, nuts, yes, your walnuts, your hemp hearts, things like that. Seeds, yes, those would be, those are all whole food fats. So those are the kind of fats we need to have. Now we've been looking, this process for me and Karen has been the last 12 years, we have been trying to learn how to do this. And one of the hardest things for us to learn is how to make like a good tasting granola without oil. How do you do that? Well, we just had one of our instructors, they came in and gave her a recipe that she had done. What she did, she took a whole food fat, almonds, and she put them in the blender. And when they're preparing their liquid to pour over the granola, as you're making the granola, you whiz those almonds up in your liquid and pour it over. And granola is nice and tender. It's not tough and chewy like the oilless granolas typically are. So it works well. You know, it's just a matter of learning how to fix foods differently that we need to do. It doesn't mean that we eat bad. We just eat differently. And so whole food fats are the best thing. Then comes cold pressed fats. Why do I want a cold pressed fat? I don't want it heated up. Yes, absolutely. I don't want it heated up above that flash point to change the nature. I want it something that is going to be wholesome and not inflammatory to me. So the cold pressed fats are the first pressing. So your extra virgin olive oil is a cold pressed fat. And that is a very good fat to have. And but can I eat it with abandon? And the answer is no. You cannot eat it with abandon. You have to eat it very sparingly. The best way to eat it is actually in the olive itself. Put the olives in your food, with the fat in it. Put the whole food fats in your food. But then there comes monounsaturated fats. Now, olive oil happens to be a monounsaturated fat. Also, things like flaxseed oil would be a monounsaturated fat. Most of the monounsaturated fats are fats that if you put them in the refrigerator, they turn like into a gel, or they maybe even turn solid. So those would be the monounsaturated fats. Yes, ma'am?
So like the olive oil and the cold press, but if you put it in the pan, does it turn into partially hydrogenated or whatever?
She's asking, does olive oil, when you put it in the pan and heat it up, does it turn into partially hydrogenated? The answer to that is no, it does not. But if you heat the olive oil up in a skillet, like you're frying something in the skillet, you don't want to do that because it will make it into an inflammatory substance. So your olive oil is best if you eat it like on salads or whatever. If you're going to have to heat or fry something, then you need to go with a polyunsaturated fat, something like soy oil. However, I don't recommend that people do that. I recommend that what you do is you learn to cook a different way. Karen, come here just a second and tell us what are some of the ways that we can actually cook without using fats.
One of the things that I do is I roast a lot. And patties, I bake them. You can use the parchment paper, or some folks actually get a silicone pad that you can put on your cookie sheet. And so those of you that got the participant handbook, there's a recipe in there for pecan patties, and I bake those. 20 minutes, you have patties good to go.
A whole bunch of them.
Yes, especially if the grandkids are coming. But anyway, and so those are things that I do. I roast a lot of stuff now.
Well, I like French fries.
Well, you can just dice up your potatoes and bake them. We'll season it and then put them in the oven and bake them. So we get the benefit of a crispy potato, but you don't have it covered in the oil.
You can hardly tell the difference.
Really? Yes, really.
What about air fryers?
What about what?
Air fryers.
I don't have an air fryer because I live off grid. And so I figured I don't want the heat. We try to avoid a lot of things with heat because it uses a lot of power. And so I don't have an air fryer, but they are wonderful. And so if you have access to an air fryer, you can dice up whatever. It makes wonderful crispy tofu, but you can bake all kinds of stuff in an air fryer. I understand. I have friends that do. Yes.
You know, it says saute your onions and mushrooms and garlic. I just use water. I learned that from my daughter.
Yes. Right. You can use vegetable broth. When you want to saute something, you can use vegetable broth, or you can simply use water. Just when your initial water cooks out, add a little bit more at a time to keep the vegetables from burning until they're done. I'll come back to you here in a minute. We have a couple more over here. Let's go here. Well, you can do those kind of things. Morningstar patties, are cooking other food in a microwave, but is a Morningstar patty a whole food? So, that is an option for someone that's transitioning. There's actually wonderful recipes for patties made from oats and that are seasoned. And so you can get a lot of the flavor, but you're not getting all of the fat that you do from the Morningstar patties. Okay, back here and then over here. I have a propane oven. And so the Mennonites were at our place the other day, and he said, well, you're not truly off-grid then. So technically, but we have, we don't have... we have the batteries, we have the solar, and so with that I'm able to use my blender and food processor and whatnot. But I just don't do a lot of heat things.
Take the potatoes and dice them and put them in the air fryer or in the oven, and onions and beets and all that together, put it in the oven. How are those potatoes different than a big potato that you should put in the fridge?
Well, the same principle will apply. When you put them in the oven, if you sliced it up or whatever, it's going to it is going to break the resistant starches apart. So it can spike your blood sugar. The key here, though, for blood sugar is not just refrigerating your stuff. After you cooked it, the key really is how high is your fiber level.
Yes.
If you have your fiber level to 50 grams or more, then you can eat your roasted veggies, and
baked potato.
You'll find out that you tolerate it very well. Also, if you're doing low fat, then you're able to your body will process a lot of these carbohydrates. That's one of the ways we can increase our carbohydrate intake by simply going low fat. Now, it upregulates the enzymes that help you deal with that.
Okay. Popcorn. A wonderful way to make popcorn is put a small amount of popcorn in a paper bag, do it in the microwave. When it comes out, dump it in a bowl and add whatever seasonings you want. A little bit of McKay's or a kind of chicken seasoning. There's recipes for homemade. And a little bit, olive oil. Pardon me? Because you do it immediately while it's still steaming. My daughter-in-law, when it comes out of the microwave, she puts it in like a Rubbermaid, a fairly big bowl container, and dumps it in there, dumps her seasoning. In fact, she has her seasonings in there. When it comes out of the microwave, she dumps it in there, puts the lid on, turns it over, and shakes it real good. And you would never know that there's no oil in it other than what was naturally in the corn when it made. Okay, one more right here, and then you want the steam, and then we're going to move on.
In the book it says that coconut oil is saturated.
We're coming to that. We're going to talk about coconut oil here in just a minute. So.
Okay, so I'm going to take one more question. She's had her hand up several times, and then we're going to move on.
This question is about extra virgin olive oil. I watched a 60-minute CBS expose about a year ago. He reported that at least 80% of the olive oil that we buy in America that comes from Europe is not pure olive oil. That the manufacturers there combine it with like safflower oil to cut it to make it less expensive to them to sell it to us. Did anyone else see that 60-minute expose?
Okay, she's saying that when the olive oil is made, a lot of it is not the pure. You've got to read your labels and make sure that you're getting the cold press. So make sure you're reading your labels on there.
But they all say cold press. They all
No, they don't. No.
Well, there are different grades of olive oil, but I understand what she's saying. She's saying that they're doing it, but they're marketing it as pure olive oil. And so the best thing, remember what I said, the very best thing to do is to eat the whole food fat. That takes care of the problem. If you're eating the whole food fat, and as we come down the list, we have monounsaturated, then there's polyunsaturated. Whether it's monounsaturated, that means it has one double bond in it. Polyunsaturated means it has 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever double bonds. It's more of a liquid oil. And then when you look at the saturated fats, all of those bonds have been saturated with hydrogen atoms. In other words, it's going to be a solid fat at room temperature typically. Those are the bad fats, and the trans fats will be the worst of all. So
if someone has been using trans fats and they move up and start using the saturated fats, are they going to improve their health?
yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And if they move on up and start using polyunsaturated, will they improve their health even more?
Yes.
Yes. And so we want to take people where they are and let's move to better choices. Okay? And let's move up, and if we can eventually get to the whole food fats, that's the very best option. So while we're there, Steve, saturated fats are up there. We need to be talking about the coconut oil.
Okay, so what about coconut oil? There is so much information about and misinformation about fats. And you have people, the problem is the way that we do our scientific studies, the reductionism. How do you sort this out and make it something that we can, where you can get through all the conflicting scientific information you're going to read? Well, that is really a deep question, and I could spend probably an hour or two talking about it in order to try to bring you down to a good solid answer. Coconut oil happens to be one of the issues that I really struggled with, because you read so many things that coconut oil is good, coconut oil reverses diabetes, coconut oil helps this, it helps that, and a person ought to eat coconut oil. You read all this information, and then you read somebody else that says coconut oil is a saturated fat. It increases insulin resistance. It makes diabetes worse. Who do you believe? Who do you believe? And so I happened to be at a seminar with T. Colin Campbell. And we had a break in the day, and I decided I have got to press this issue with the world's top expert. And so I went to him and I said, what about coconut oil? And he sighed heavily. I know he's been asked that question 30 million times. And he said, look, I've been talking all day about the kind of transitions a person needs to make. We need to be going to where we're eating whole plant-based foods. If we could get people just to make that transition, if you can get people to make a transition from the processed foods that we're eating today and all the animal-based foods to where they're eating plant-based whole foods. He said, doesn't matter if you're working GMO, it doesn't matter if it's non-organic stuff, if they will simply make the one transition to where they're eating whole plant-based foods, they would prevent 75% of the chronic diseases. 75%. Do you want health insurance? To me, this is the best health insurance you can get, is adopt a lifestyle of whole plant-based eating. It reverses type 2 diabetes. It reverses cardiovascular disease. It improves irritable bowel syndrome. It helps people come under control or go into remission on diseases like lupus or any other inflammatory-based disease, which is most of them out there. And take this, for instance. The average person who eats whole food plant-based will live 13 and a half years longer than the general population. The person with a diagnosis of diabetes lives 10 years less than the general population. So if you have type 2 diabetes and you reverse your type 2 diabetes by going to a whole food plant-based diet, what might that potentially mean in terms of your lifespan? 23 and a half years? Is that worth anything to anybody? And here's the thing, you're not getting older and older, you're getting older more slowly. In other words, these people live high functional levels up here. And then right at the end, they decline very rapidly. You'd be like Karen's stepdad. He was 105 years old. And he went to bed one night and he woke up dead the next morning.
He woke up dead.
No, he just simply went to bed. He folded his arms across his chest. That was the posture he usually slept in. And the next morning, he was in that position, just lying peacefully in his bed. He day traded within 2 weeks of the date of his death. He made more money after he retired than he made before he retired. He retired in 1963, I think it was. And he died in 2012 or 2013. He had a long career of retirement. But I have been with that man. You know, here he is, 98 years old, and he's climbing a ladder to get up on his roof to check and be sure there's no holes in the roof. I said, let me go up on the roof. Oh, he follows me right up there. And you stay down there. No, he just, he was going to do what he was going to do. Now, oh, this is good stuff, guys. I have one more thing I really want to show you, and that is this chart right here. This chart is information that we knew back in 1925. Now, what we're doing here is we're actually comparing diets by countries. So you'll notice that there's the USA, and then there's Holland, and there's England, and Wales, Scotland, Italy, and Japan along the bottom. Now, the light gray here is looking at the percent fat in the diet. And the diamonds represent the diabetes rate. What happens to the diabetes rate when the percent fat in the diet goes up? Diabetes goes up. What happens to the diabetes rate when the fat in the diet goes down? It goes down, absolutely. Now let's look at it the other way. You'll notice the dark gray bars. This represents carbohydrates. What happens when you increase the carbohydrates in the diet? The rate of diabetes goes down. How can that be? How can that be? That's going to be hard. Yes, ma'am, it is.
Very hard to convince people to go to this because I know so many people on keto not
And yes. Yes.
Steve, repeat the
Yes.
comment.
So she's saying it's going to be very hard to convince the people of this when they are doing the keto diet. And is that true? Yes, that is true. But here's the thing. If you're doing the keto diet, will the keto diet control your blood sugar? The answer is yes. You'll pull the blood sugar back down to normal on a keto diet. And everybody that is on a keto diet eventually goes off the keto diet. Then what happens? Blood sugar skyrockets, and often it is worse than before. Why? That's because the increased fat in the cells increases insulin resistance. And you will not reverse your diabetes. They call it diabetes reversal because they're controlling the blood sugar. But if you give them a sugar challenge, what's going to happen? Blood sugar will spike. You know, these people are not truly reversed. They are controlling the blood sugar with keto. But it increases insulin resistance. Yes, sir?
I've seen people do the Atkins diet. They start doing the Atkins diet, and all of a sudden they say, "Oh, I'm getting sick on this Atkins diet." They start to get off of it. So they'll start working doing the Atkins diet.
Right. Yeah, he's mentioning Atkins diet. A lot of people that are on the Atkins diet, they feel bad. I have some more things I'm going to say about Atkins diet, but I think that I will save that for another time. What I want us all to do now is everybody stand up. Yes, yes, yes. We've got to do the exercising thing again one more time, at least one more time, and maybe one more time more today. All right, let's start stepping side to side, just get the circulation going. And today we're going to, you remember, any form of exercise works for burst training, but you have to do it vigorously, okay? And so do what you're able to do. If you're not able to do it, you can stay in your seat. We understand. That's okay. But one of the things we have learned, if a person is 99 years old and are living a sedentary lifestyle and they start to exercise, they probably will add years to their life. Okay? Exercise is just very important. We were meant to exercise. Okay, so what we're going to do today, for today's burst, we're going to take these elbows, and I want you to head for your knees and see if you can put them between the knees. And then we're going back up and down and up. Oh, that's looking good. People are getting it. If you can't go very far, it's okay to go a little ways. But if you can really be vigorous, then see if you can get down to your ankles. Whoa! 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, is that making the blood pump or what? Oh, I can see people working all over the room right now. Yes, sirree.
Okay, 18, 19, 20.
Woo! Now, do you feel alive again? I bet you do.
So move. Do
Isn't
your
that fun?
Active movement.
Okay. Yeah, so we're going to rest for about a minute. And remember what's happening here. Those of you that missed yesterday, what happens when you do this? Inside our cells, we have little furnaces. They're called mitochondria. And that's where most of our sugar is burned. But when we do this burst of 20 to 30 seconds, 30 seconds is actually the optimal. And so you want to aim for 30 seconds, but start out gentle. So the minimal is 20 seconds, that's where we start, and then we go to 30 seconds. And you should get to the place where you're just starting to slow down. You just can't do it. And that uses up what's inside the mitochondria. Then it has to reach out into the storage in the cell and pull in some extra energy. And this process will decrease insulin resistance. It's 9 times more effective than going to the gym and working out real hard. So anyway, it's good stuff.
Time for the next.
Okay, so what we're going to do next, we're going to run in place. And we're going to do some curls. So curl, curl, curl. This is a great exercise to do. Put a water bottle or a can of peas or something like that in each hand and do it. Okay, now let's punch. Punch, punch, punch. Yes, good. And now it's time for the person next to you to feel a punch. Okay, and over the head.
17, 18, 19,
Woo!
20.
Oh, and back to active rest. Whew. If you don't get to where you can't talk, you're not doing it hard enough. Okay, good stuff. Now, one of the things I want to tell you about this burst training, I'm stealing this from a future lecture. When you do the burst training, you can do it at least 3 times a week, every other day. Mark your calendar. That's important. That's because you have increased fat burning for up to 72 hours after you do the burst training. Okay, so while you're sleeping in the bed, you're burning fat. If you're burning fat, what's happening to your weight?
It's coming down.
Yes, that's good news, isn't it? Okay, and so you can get increased benefit by going to 4, 5, and 6 sessions a week. But if you go to 7, what happens is your metabolism rate tanks back to below where you were when you started. Our bodies were meant to operate, but to have 1 day of rest a week. It's built into your physiology. So 6 days you shall labor and do all your burst training and your exercise. But the 7th day you shall not. You shall take a day of rest to worship your Creator. Okay. One more time, we're going to start with those punches. This time you can face the other way, and we're going again. Curl, curl, curl. Now let's lift. Lift, lift, lift. Lift, lift, lift. If you have some kettles, you can do it with those too. Now punch, punch, punch. Faster. And out to the side. Turn it up. Let's ramp it up. Let's really go. Yes, we are getting rid of diabetes, and this is so much
17,
fun.
18, 19, 20.
Woo! Stop. Oh, man. That's good stuff. Guys, our next appointment will be this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And what are we going to talk about this afternoon?
Proteins.
Proteins that heal. Don't miss it. We'll see you then.
Let's have a prayer before we go.
Would you?
Heavenly Father, I thank you that we've had this opportunity to be together, to share, to learn, and I pray that we will be all that you would have us to be, and you want us to be healthy. So please be with us and enable us on this journey. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.